On my very left is Mr. Jon Raymond. In the middle, Mr. Joshua Berger. And to my immediate left, the foxy Miss Tiffany Lee Brown. Ow. Welcome to the Backroom, as guests this time. Yeah. Tiffany and Josh have been to many Backroom events, I'm very, very happy to say. And I believe this is John's first, almost, sort of first.
I came to the book release.
So be gentle.
What?
So be gentle.
So be gentle. Yeah. Oh, my God. Yes, I'll try.
This is like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I'd love to start by asking Joshua if he would sort of ground us in the beginning, back in the beginning when Plazm was starting, maybe even before Plazm was starting, but sort of take us to the place that has resulted in the rich accumulation of material and ideas and actions and activism that we now know as Plazm.
Okay. Well, Plazm was founded in 1991, and it was really by a group of artists and writers and, all different disciplines who were looking for avenues of expression. And there were just a bunch of people that would get together every week, and it was kind of these open-ended meetings where we'd talk about artists representing artists, and about media and the result. We didn't know we were going to make a magazine, but that's what came out of all those discussions. And we used to meet in the space on the Everett Street lofts for a while, and then there was a house. I don't know if anybody remembers the Last Thursday house. We used to meet there. That was before Last Thursday moved to Alberta. Yeah, so it was up in Northwest Portland, up by the abortion clinic. I don't remember. It was like a block from wherever it is, up in Northwest. Yeah.
Lovejoy?
Yeah,
Lovejoy.
It was right near the Lovejoy Clinic. Yeah, so there's a big house up there. And, we just had these open-ended discussions, and the magazine, the first issue of the magazine was what came out as a result of that, and it was entirely self-financed. There was one person that was involved at the time, Patrick Bardell, and he had enough money to pay for the printing, and so we all agreed to pay him back in equal portions over a certain period of time, and that's how the first issue came out, and it was we put out 4 issues or so like that, and then and they were all larger format, different than what we do now, 11 by 17 pages, and as it evolved, it just changed. It changes every issue, but a lot of the philosophy of it was that, as I said, artists represent artists, but also that design would take a strong role in portraying the work. So we would have these. The magazine would be an open forum, an open submissions format. So people would send submissions in. We would solicit submissions, and then as a group, we'd decide what goes into the magazine, and just this collective decision-making process. And then after we decide what the content is, I was acting as art director, and I would hand out or assign content to different designers, or design things myself, or and it's sort of like one artist interpreting another's work, and that's how I've always thought of the design of the magazine. So where you have something like poetry, and you push the design into a different place, then it's something that would typically be read by a very specific segment, a specific audience, and through design it can reach different audience. So I don't know what else to say, but it's evolved over. The magazine is what Plazm started as, and out of that has grown a number of other things. For a number of years we experiment with typography, and we still do today, but Plazm Fonts was founded around 1993 or 94 by myself and Pete McCracken, who still runs Plazm Fonts, but we're separate entities now.
When did it start getting distribution?
Well, we distribute ourselves in just locally with the first issue, but we also, I mean, none of us knew how to produce a magazine. None of us knew anything about magazine business. We just built it and started sending it out and going around to local stores and seeing if they'd carry us, and then we started looking in various other magazines, like there's Anarchy magazine or whatever it is. Yeah, so they list their distributors in their magazine, which is great. So, we called all of them and sent them a copy of the magazine, and some of them pick us up. And then there were other instances, like I remember on our voicemail one time that we got this message from this guy at Tower Records. And the message was like, "Today's your lucky day," and he had just been in. It's really funny.
Did he talk like that?
Yeah, pretty much. That's how I remember it. And he left a message. He had been in Rich's cigar store, and he picked up a copy of Plazm #2, and then they carried us ever since until they went bankrupt.
Plazm bankrupted them.
Yeah. I don't know if they're related.
There's that kind of decision making.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was all really trial and error, and so everything that I know about the magazine business I learned just by trying to do it and seeing what happened, really.
Has Plazm, like it does today, always had each issue always had a guiding theme and a conceptual structure to it?
No,
And how did that evolve?
Yeah, it was just out of experimentation. I mean, I'd say the first 8 issues did not have a theme at all. They were all submissions based, and then the first editor was Neva Knott, and she went to grad school about that point, and then the 9th issue. The second editor was Yuri Verbenovich, and he came on board, and John was the 3rd editor. So there have only been 3 editors in the entire history. So Tiffany is the 4th editor. So that's the history.
Wasn't there a video element to it?
Well, we tried that. It never really got out. We never really put it together.
And what did that look like? What was that supposed to be?
Well, it was supposed to be a version of the magazine, basically a video version of the magazine, and we collected all kinds of submissions, and we had a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But
say more about that, Johnny.
Well, let's see. What is there to say? God, I wish I could remember some of the stuff we had on there now. This was around the same time that Matt McCormick started doing his collected video tapes, peripheral produce stuff. Yeah, and I think it was a sort of simultaneous idea, and he started doing them as well. And we went so far as to run an ad in the magazine asking for submissions. But then I think that was about as
well. We got a bunch. I mean, there was a whole box. I think I still have the box of tapes. I have a box of videotapes, and some people we solicited too. I know Rebecca Mendez, for instance, sent some stuff that was really beautiful. But we never. Financially, it was never became something that we could.
It is
figure
such a
out how to
natural
do.
idea. Yeah. I don't know if people have seen that Wolfen thing that McSweeney's does. They're kind of doing a similar thing now.
Right, it's DVD.
It's such a natural idea. It's a hard sell on the shelves, though, I think, too.
I mean, I think a lot of it could be done now. You could do it all online, really now. But but when we first started, I mean, you have to pay to print it, pay to distribute it.
It was before computers.
Right. Yeah.
Did you guys look into, the impetus of starting Plazm? Were you looking at past journals along those lines? Because talking about, doing a print publication, but then having this video thing, there are publications like Aspen that was happening in the late 60s that was also trying to do similar things, but as well had kind of a similar socio-political mindset to you guys.
Well, everybody, I think each individual that has been involved always brings something to the group. And so as we're making a magazine now, it's 3 of us. as editors and curators, and so whoever was involved at that time would be inspired by different things. But myself personally, I mean, I remember Mondo. I thought Mondo 2000 was great, and I would get every issue. And she was actually involved in Mondo, which is amazing. Like now, and there was one issue we did an ad trade with them, she was a picture of Tiffany was in Plazm number 6 in the Mondo 2000 ad. We never met each other.
That's so romantic.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. So that's one that was inspiring to me. But also, I remember reading a magazine called Transition and Transition, and I think the old Flares, Avant Garde. There's a lot of great examples of situationists, whatever. There's tons of stuff.
And I'd say, just to address that too, it's like I think that there is just this kind of churning discourse of smaller kind of presses that's constantly going, and I think every generation ultimately kind of reinvents a lot of the same kind of stuff, and it is fun going back and finding magazines or things that echo what people are doing now. It's not like it's something incredibly new all the time. I know for myself, my dad was involved with the Whole Earth catalog, and it was those were always kind of sitting around the house and just had such this erratic sort of presence, and it's you just kind of like to find those old things, to me that's the great hope is that in 20 years there's an issue sitting around in Powell somewhere, and it's oh, look, these people are doing this thing,
Right, documents it.
I just sent Josh a picture from my telephone the other day of Plazm magazine sitting on a shelf in a bookstore in Fresno, California, which I found very inspiring.
Yeah, that's great. I got an email today from a former intern that was in New York, and it's I'm just seeing it all over or whatever. But,
Well, how much of it is ambassadorial in a way? Because before when I moved here in the late 90s from Brooklyn, I knew about Plazm, and it was one of the Portland things that I knew. And I actually called Pete right when I moved here, and Pete looked at my photographs because I wanted to be able to work with Plazm.
Right.
And he very kindly told me that I wasn't good enough.
Oh wow, that was thoughtful of you.
We have Sarah.
Yeah, Reed just told me when he was in high school, he bought Plazm in California, Palo Alto at Tower Records. And it changed his life because he was a nerdy geek, and then he became art boy.
Art boy, that's like a superhero.
I'd like to personally thank you.
For the art boy version of it. Yeah, Nerdy Geek is awesome.
But I think that is one of the huge functions of magazines. I mean, it's there's so many stories of kids in the Midwest getting Interview magazine or something.
Absolutely.
And realizing there's a world outside of wherever. And that they're important things for a lot of people who don't get to live in Portland all the time.
Well, in terms of the content, I think it's
that have to live in these backwaters like Brooklyn.
It was hell.
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back to the beginning, I'm curious what your first print run number was in comparison to now.
it's probably actually pretty close to the same number now, actually. I mean, it's went up and down depending on...
Yeah, it depends. Are you an advertiser?
She's a publisher, actually.
Yeah. I think the first print run was probably about 5,000, and we sold it for $2, and it was printed on a high grade of newsprint, and 11 by 17 pages, maybe, 48 pages, or maybe less than that. I can't remember how many pages, but the second issue was thicker, more pages. We raised the price to $225. We printed more copies, a big stack of which are still in my basement. But then it changed with every issue. The third issue, we went to an offset press, so the quality was much better. We had to charge $3 for that one. We printed maybe 3,000 or 4,000. The fourth issue, we sold for $2 225 or 325 or something. 325, and if we would have sold every copy of that magazine, we still wouldn't have broken even, and that just shows you how much we knew about what we were doing. So after that, we changed the size, and we started to get a little bit better at distribution. Because we found that we weren't able to get on certain shelves because of the large format and the economy of paper and so on.
Still at like 5,000?
Yeah, I think we ran 4,000 of the last issue, 4,000. But it's up to, there were times where we ran 10,000, So magazine business is very difficult, I think. There were times where we were trying really hard to get to where we're doing it quarterly and really going after all the ad accounts and trying to maximize the distribution. And for an independent publisher, it's very difficult to do that because you pay to print it, then you send it out, and you have to wait until you send the next issue to get paid for the first one. Distributors typically pay like maybe 120 days, 90 days, 120 days after they receive the second issue. And so you could be into it for 2 to 3, on a quarterly magazine, you could be into it for almost 3 issues worth of printing before you see any return on the magazine sales. And they only pay you for 50% of what you sell. So if you sell 10%, you're screwed, And you can't really count that. That's why, magazines have 50% advertising content because, that's the only way to that's the only way to pay for it. You can subscribe to National Magazine's 12 issues for $12. It doesn't even cover the postage, but we don't have the resources to be able to sell, the numbers. We don't have the numbers. So what we have is a highly qualified audience. We have an audience. That's how we positioned it to advertisers, is that the people that read Plazm are people that influence other people.
So do you have subscriptions?
Not anymore. We used to. Now the new format for the last two years is we put out the magazine one time a year, and it's more of a book. It's like about 150 pages, perfect bound, 4-color throughout, and so that's the current format of the magazine, and the 3 of us curate it.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking of it as a magazine, actually, in part because I never think of it as something that might be disposable in my life. In the way that a magazine is, it's something that I put on my shelf and I keep very carefully in order. It's not something that I see sort of coming and going. I want to go back to something that you mentioned in your essay about starting the design business to support the magazine. Can you talk about the relationship between those two things, the magazine and the design business and the Type Foundry?
Sure. I think they have informed one another, but as the magazine never paid for itself, and we always had everybody that was involved would have their own jobs or freelance or whatever to pay the bills, and the magazine was something that everybody volunteered to work on and to do, and so. There was a point where there was only myself and Pete and Nico left, and so the 3 of us just sat down and was, well, let's try and do design work as Plazm and as a way to, take the process and the form and the content of what we do together and apply it to commercial projects to pay the bills. And we had already, around that time, we had already done a couple of pro bono projects. We did a thing for Orlo, which was a statewide campaign.
Oh my God, that was the You End Danger one?
You End Danger.
Yeah.
Did anyone see Michael Clayton? I've mentioned.
You mentioned that? Yeah, I watched it. I saw it.
There's a scene. Okay, it's
I
this
can't
little
believe you
thing
even
that they
saw that.
designed. That's like it says "You in Danger" with
It's
this
a
little fish
salmon.
on it with the salmon.
Yeah.
And if you watch Michael Clayton very carefully, there's a scene where he's in an elevator, and like on the wall behind him is that thing, is the actual thing.
Yeah,
I was like,
that's
oh my God, there's that thing. That's fucking amazing.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's funny. It's only on there for a second, and I can't believe you even noticed it. You know, but I went to. That's what got me to go see the movie.
Saw it, right?
Yeah. You told me about that. I had to go see the movie. So, Yeah, it's funny. I mean, that's an interesting thing, just the ephemeral nature of things and the act of creating something and putting it out into the world. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I love the magazine, is just because it has a life of its own. Once it's out of our hands and into the environment, you never know where you're gonna, who's gonna pick it up, where it's gonna end up, who's gonna read it. And I mean, there have been countless times where, like what Sam mentioned and Sarah mentioned, that people read it as and see it as something that comes from Portland. So it's located in a place, or it's these people are living here and doing this thing. But it's also it goes around the world. And I mean, I got a call or an email from somebody trying to get a hold of Michael Jones. This was just last year, right? The photographer who shot, John and Storm put together this series of photographs. It was these epic battle scenes based on ecclesiastical paintings, and there were ER techs versus chefs, and
Fairies and mummies.
Fairies and mummies,
and the
monks,
softball players and monks.
Softball players.
Yeah, so there are these beautiful photographs. But anyway, that's sort of digression. But so last year, somebody from Sweden sent me an email trying to get a hold of the photographer. And I mean, it's got to be at least 5 or 6 years after the magazine came out.
Yeah,
it's just totally random. Yeah, but you never know where the thing's going to end up.
And speaking a little bit to what Stephanie says too, I mean, one of the nice things about not coming out on a monthly or really any kind of timely basis is there's no sense of having to be topical in any kind of sense. Like, one really has to kind of, it's not going to be an article about, the Iowa caucus or something, So it's like one has to think in not to be so non-topical. I mean, you want to kind of have it be relevant to society, but it's nice to not have to be so. I mean, so many magazines, you can just see them filling up their pages with all this garbage because they have to have something to get on the stands. I mean, it's like, okay, we have these departments that have to get filled, and we have to come up with some bullshit opinion about Hillary Clinton crying. So it's like, I don't know. In my mind, there's probably enough good content out in the world for about 4 magazines to come out every month, And it's just nice not to have to work under those sort of just industrial constraints, I mean, it's like the Luck one, it was almost a 5-year period.
It was 4 years, yeah.
And it helped. It was better, it was really.
So that was
fun.
4 years between 27 and 28.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing other things too. You had moved to New York. Yeah, that's one thing. Plazm did 2 or 3 books in that period of time. So I mean, there were
everyone
other things,
has plenty of stuff to do. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But we kind of shelved it, and then but it was great to come back to it, and this is kind of a rebirth, if you will, which is the next theme.
So part of the reason that it took a long time is that you wanted to preserve the relationships that were in place to produce this piece of culture.
I don't know,
you didn't want to work with other people. I mean, you said John moved to New York, so you were patient with John while he moved to New York.
Well, it wasn't even so much that. I don't know. It just came about when it came about. It wasn't.
Yeah, there wasn't anything too concerted, I don't think.
No, I mean we would have tried to.
I had to go to New York and drag a woman home by the hair.
There's a quite.
Just FYI, I was at Rich's downtown the other day.
Yeah.
Trying to buy a copy of Plazm. And they don't carry it anymore.
Yeah, they called us today, actually, because so many people have asked for it, and probably including you. So they called us today, and so we're delivering some copies to them next week. Yes.
I was curious because he said, I talked to the owner. I mean, the guy with the cigar who's always in there. And, he said that he told me that you guys had stopped production for 6 months or 9 months.
Right.
So I was curious what that was about and what the changes have been and what happened during that time and what something, are you going in a new direction or what happened?
Yeah, well, we publish only 1 issue a year, so it's kind of defies what the normal magazine
Plazm gives new meaning to the term shelf life.
Well, and when we published 28, it had been so long that on the masthead I put, Plazm is published periodically, because
No pun
I figured that would
intended.
just cover everything,
No, please, Storm.
You used to, I don't know if the new issue does it or not, but you used to have the back issues pages in the back.
Can everybody hear Storm?
No.
Speak up, dude.
In the first issues, I don't recall if the new issue has it or not, but they used to, in the back pages, they would have the back issues that would be available if you wanted to have a complete collection,
Yeah.
which I was always
Like
very
an
fascinated by. Do you still do the back issues?
We still do. A number of them are sold out, but there's actually on the back table, there's a box. We sell a box. That's the current form of, like if you wanted to have all of what is available, there's like 20 some copies and all kinds of ephemera from different shows that we put on or performances and things.
Is there a best-selling issue?
Is there a best-selling issue? Yes.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly. I think 28 did well, and 29 is doing very well, and it's so hard to tell. I mean, there are a number of them that are sold out, which I think is that's there are a whole bunch of them that are sold out. So, and sometimes that had to do with it being a good issue. Other times it had to do with us just not planning very well and not printing enough. So. We had orders for, like, that's what happened with issue 7, which is just the hardest one. Like, that's the one that we've been out of the longest. And now when we're getting actually museum collections are asking for the whole collection, and we don't always have it. So there's only a few.
What was the cover for 7?
It was a Frank Kozik cover. And this actually maybe goes back to what you were talking about, the merging of the design and the only reason we got Frank Kozik is because he was at Wyden working on this. Maybe you remember the Revolution, his like Nike Revolution stuff with Jelly, and so he was doing all these posters for Nike, and so we just asked him.
Josh, how did you become a designer?
I knew I wanted to be a designer from when I was in high school. I remember going into the counseling office, the career counseling office, and looking up graphic design. And I don't know, for some reason, I don't know why, but I've always just been interested in visual communication and politics and visual communication and those things. So that's, I have a 2-year associate degree in graphic design. That's my formal education.
Is that here?
Mount Hood Community College.
Right on.
Yeah.
I want Tiffany to say something.
Yeah, I want Tiffany to say something too.
I was not here at the beginning of Plazm magazine. I admired it a lot.
She's not the wife.
From afar. And I was in a full-page ad for Mondo 2000 magazine. So if you have your copy of Plazm number, whatever that was.
6.
Number 6. And you see this sort of androgynous, weird creature with a mohawk. That's me. But I loved it from afar, and I was from Eugene and had always spent a fair amount of time in Portland and was living in the Bay Area at the time. And for those of you who were, I think most of us are of the age where we actually remember this era. So most people were not online at the time. I was one of those weird nerds who was. But there was this whole crazy zine revolution going on and an amazing graphics and typographical revolution at the same time. And certainly on the West Coast, there was a lot of really interesting, bizarre, fun stuff happening. And Mondo and Plazm and Raygun and Might. There were all these really cool publications going on. And then, and I ended up moving back to Oregon, moved to Portland. I was involved with the startup of Anodyne magazine here in town. And so there was just a lot of excellent action happening and people getting really involved. And then people were starting to get online, which really blew it all out so that you could all kind of find each other a little more easily. But when these guys were talking about, say, somebody in the Midwest getting to discover this whole world out there, or saying, wow, look at this Plazm magazine, something's happening in Portland, Oregon. That's in a context of a world where not everybody has cable TV, and God knows they don't have their own 1200 baud modem, most of them, which is the max you probably could have gotten back then. And so there was a lot more invested in print, I think, than there is now. Now it's a little more kind of specialized in a way.
Definitely.
What was there a concerted effort for there to be content and design? Because like what you like, there's Plazm and then Ray Gun, and I remember reading Ray Gun too, and sometimes you couldn't even get past the design for the content. But I think the really great thing about Plazm was it also a lot of other great, though more maybe music-oriented Northwest publications. I mean, you have Op and Puncture that were mainly only content. I think though their design was all right, I don't think they really focus on design. But the good thing about Plazm is it was always a really, and still is, a really great middle line between very good design, but there's a real appreciation for good content.
I can say when I came in '97 or so, there was definite like clashes sometimes between the legibility versus this question of like legibility was sometimes an issue. I remember one essay.
It's always an issue.
It was always an issue, but it kind of calmed down at a certain point. But I remember one where like there was this long essay that the designer had then designed. Each paragraph was like this little sphere. And you had to read each sort of sphere. It almost went in this like intestinal kind of like thing where you like would have to turn the page and everything. Right. And I was like, this is just, and it was like a long essay. It was like thousands of words, and it's just like, this is totally not acceptable, But she changed it.
Yeah. Well, that's all. That was always a discussion.
Well, I'm looking at I know everybody can't see this, but I'm looking at these 2 pages. I proudly showed this to my mother because I have an interview with Jessica Jackson Hutchins in this magazine, and she just happened to turn it open to the spread, and her eyes crossed, and she had absolutely no concept of what to do.
Well, there's I think there's more. I mean, there's always a context. Like this is all about the history of Portland DIY music. So it's
form meets content. And it shifts dramatically throughout each issue.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the philosophy that I've had as an art director is just that each piece is interpreted. So, like I said, one artist interpreting another's work, and I try and match up different designers with the content that will be challenging for them or appropriate for them or, whatever. And there's no, from page to page, it doesn't have to, there's not one font that's used throughout the whole magazine, although we did that one issue just to kind of push ourselves, use only one typeface. But it's always just interpretive. I think that's the idea, and design is a vehicle for dramatizing. It's a vehicle for communication. It's a vehicle for interpretation, and so we've always tried to include it. But we've never been specifically a design magazine. I think that we're in between. That's why, because we always had designers involved in making the thing. So there were, Emigre is another magazine that I could say was influential in the early days too. So.
Does anybody have a question before? Yeah.
I have a question about thematic publications, like say Cabinet, where like you do, there's an overriding theme in some of them, and now that you have one publication per year, how do you settle on a theme, and how constricted do you feel about holding to that theme? I guess it's a curatorial.
We talk about it, the three of us. I mean, you can talk about the upcoming one or the
walk us through how an issue gets put together.
Yeah, they've kind of come from different places sometimes. I mean, in the past there have been thematic issues previous to the last 2. We did like one that was a sort of architecture issue. we did a celebrity issue. And some of those were driven just by the things that ended up being around. You end up collecting things from a lot of different places, and sometimes you start seeing some kind of through line, and you can stick a concept on it to kind of, give it some kind of shape. It was funny with the one previous to this one, the luck issue, the theme was luck. It ended up sort of only being halfway realized in some way, because we had a bunch of stuff that kind of had to do with luck, but then it did take such a long time to come together that there was just other stuff that we liked that really would be hard to qualify as like thematic, but we just kind of put it in there anyway. But we had this great cover by Milton Glaser that said luck on it, so we definitely kind of had to stick with the theme. And then this last one, I feel like, was a somewhat retrospective thing. Like, we just kind of, the theme on the most recent one is collective memory. And I think it just had to do partly with one of the foundations of this issue was the photography collection of Tom Robinson, which is an amazing thing. He's an incredible photo archivist here in town, and we just wanted to use as much of his stuff as possible in there, and that really ended up being something that recurred throughout the issue in different ways. And then as we sort of got into it, we realized that this kind of idea of kind of dipping into the past and kind of thinking about the past was something that was kind of binding a lot of it together. Then we have a new issue. In this case, I think we've come up with a theme, and I think we're going to try and find stuff that actually applies to it, and we'll see how that process works. And so the next theme, if anyone has any great ideas, is born again. So, trying to kind of expand the idea, I don't know. We haven't really talked too much about the real conceptual underpinnings here, but I know. I mean, the idea of being born again has been so kind of owned by the Christian right in a certain sense, but really this idea of rebirth and being reborn is a kind of concept that's in a lot of different kinds of traditions and can be, sort of thought about in a lot of different ways. So I think we're going to be looking for things that have something like that in there, but, we'll see. So far, I don't know if we have a lot. Yeah.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Would you read the first and the last paragraph of the beginning of the new issue for us?
Okay.
And
go ahead.
No, just kind of in a way to specifically spark some conversation and reaction from
You got to read
us
the headline,
assembled.
though, too.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so this is sort of the opening editor's note on the new issue, the collective memory one. Partly, I think it was composed just to have some excuse to have this awesome picture of Bill Walton in here, which comes from Tom Robinson's collection. He has a lot of the old Oregonian photographers' stuff, and so this is like a series of photos that was taken in the late 70s, like for Time magazine or something like that.
It was for Time, but this is a shot that was never used.
Yeah, this shot never got used, but it was just sort of on the same roll. Okay. To hell with the new. Actually, originally it was going to be fuck the new, but that seemed too harsh. We already have more music, writing, art, and experience piled up than we can possibly deal with. And so much of the fresh news we receive is at best a distraction. Every week the next movies arrive, the next celebrity temper tantrum, the next batch of lies from the podium. And meanwhile, Jack Abramoff's gaming of the political system already seems like ancient history. It's getting clearer all the time that most of what passes for the new is just a way of forgetting what really matters. And then there's some stuff about the actual issue itself. The new is so 20th century. We want wisdom, not information. We want to explore old music, old books, and old photographs, figure out what we care about, and preserve it for those who come later. We want to walk backward into the future, which is just kind of like, I don't know, one of the most overused sort of, maybe people know the Walter Benjamin image of the angel of history flying into the future backwards. So it's the angel of history is looking backwards as it flies, which is a kind of a chestnut of art writing in a certain ways, but had to use it, It's just so good. It is such a good image.
You weren't thinking of Michael J. Fox?
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, the DeLorean of history, yeah. But yeah, so that was sort of, that was the sort of, conceptual binding for the issue.
And not levity aside, but levity over here for a second. What do you want that statement, and what do you want your work to do in the world? I know you have very strong political beliefs and engage in a lot of activism. Tiffany, you want to pick that one up?
Sure. For me, part of what is really delightful about hooking up with Plazm is that with this history that we've been talking about, there is a very established, pretty high standard of what Plazm is going to do, and yet it's also flexible. There are people who know about this thing, who are excited about it. If we put out a magazine, if we do an event, people really want to be part of it. And to me, and I tend to come from projects that are much more marginalized and kind of weird and off in the corner doing strange stuff that maybe a few people are going to notice, but largely don't have sort of that larger, more cohesive feeling to them. And part of what I really dig about Plazm is that if you do have attention in that way, if you're known for good work, if people really, really want to read what you do, they really want to participate, amazing artists, designers, writers pop out of the woodwork and say, I want to be part of this, and no, you don't have to pay me. And, it's really fabulous. If you've got all that going on, you have, and I think you sort of have the responsibility to use a socio-political platform that some would argue is inherent anyway in any act of media, in any act of art or performance. There is the sort of personal is political element. But if you have created something that beautiful, that has that much history, that has so many people interested in it, then frickin' use it, and use it to as a conduit for political explorations, not necessarily just big messages that you want to beat somebody over the head with, although those can be good too, but to really consciously expand what you're talking about and how you're talking about it, and say, okay, well, does a magazine that might cover a pop culture type of issue, is it also going to have unembedded photographers in Iraq reporting from the front lines and from the villages? Yeah, let's do that. In this last issue, I spearheaded this thing called The End of War, and I just wanted to see what writers and artists would do with that idea. And a lot of really wonderful people came up and created work around that idea, some of it very unexpected. And so I think it's sort of a civic responsibility if you've got something going on and people are paying attention, if you completely ignore the political aspect because it may be easier, certainly more marketable, to avoid that stuff. I just think that's irresponsible, and I like that Plazm is unafraid to get in there and wrestle with that.
I'll pick up on that maybe too. Like, I was thinking about this a little bit before, sort of, thinking about what we're going to be talking about and stuff. And I don't know if people have read Benedict Anderson ever, but he's a writer. He talked about a lot about the rise of print culture being kind of connected to the rise of the nation state in some way, and that the kind of invention of newspapers and just print in general is kind of one of the big ways in which nation states were able to even imagine themselves as coherent kinds of entities. And I feel like there is just something very inherently political in just the sense of in being an independent publisher in some way, and that there is a kind of he has a book called Imagined Communities, and that there is an imagined community to that is organized around the different kinds of texts. And there is Plazm, I think, falls within the imagined community of Plazm is much different than that of the New Republic or Vanity Fair or something like that. And to me, there is a somewhat there's an inherent sort of political question being answered or proposed or something like that just by the fact of these things going out and the kind of conversation that goes on between these people. And so, I mean, to me, like trying to get at what you're talking about, I think this goes back to what Sam was talking about as well, too. Like there are, histories of sort of countercultural magazines of some kinds. And I think, and I don't mean countercultural in the most sort of trite, hippy-dippy kind of way, but like actually, magazines or books that are telling a counter history to the sort of larger, more accepted kind of histories that tend to kind of dominate political conversation. And like, just the fact that, someone has to do this kind of stuff in some way, and someone's always doing it, but it's like, it is, I don't know. That's about
I would also say at the beginning of the founding of Plazm, it was a group of artists looking for self-representation, but it was also, there was definitely a conscious effort of the fact that most media, 95% of media, is controlled by 5 corporations in this country, and so, the simple act of owning independent media or being involved in independent media is something that was very much a part of the founding of the magazine, and the idea that the content needs to be stuff that isn't necessarily in mainstream media, that doesn't necessarily have another avenue for expression. I mean, much of it does or may, but our goal is not to.
And which isn't to say it has to be like Noam Chomsky all the time. I mean, there is like a more wide-ranging kind of menu of things that one can kind of view as political. And there is just like a kind of an artistic fantasy that hopefully is kind of like expanded through it that, keeps reproducing itself, and that doesn't bum people out.
Which certainly
like,
happens through
I don't
aesthetics.
Know. Say again?
Yeah, I think that certainly happens through the aesthetic of the magazine.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know that Josh certainly takes very seriously the idea of this, like what we're talking about, this sort of political role, and as do all of us. And I don't know. I don't want to go too far into it. It's like there's
Isn't even, I mean, like, I would view this last issue, Tiffany's inclusion of this chronology of kind of Northwest music as political. I mean, here are these bands that have a particular aesthetic, how they were going to operate, how they were going to do things.
Well, I think that's social also, and it's also about collective memory. But
Also, by the way, Napalm Beach is playing tonight.
No way.
So we got to cut it short. Yeah.
But no, I think that there is a definite politics that, I mean, particularly in like in a music community that is like so inundated with new people who don't necessarily know what happened here in the 80s and 70s and even in the 90s. Like there is some, I mean, there's just a utility too, that it's like, oh, people now can know, at least some names of people who have been doing the same stuff. I mean, I think that's always like curious. I mean, one always,
Yeah,
I think there's a politics to that.
No, I think it's true.
Absolutely.
I think it's like when I read Plazm, I feel a kind of sense of urgency to be something of an archive in a very straightforward sense. I mean, in an art magazine, take this issue, for example, and encountering page after page of Storm's photographs, but without, a bunch of art speak associated with them. I feel like there's always a certain aspect to Plazm that feels a responsibility to chronicle what you believe is happening that is worthwhile to pay attention to.
Yeah,
but not be didactic about it.
And not necessarily. I view us as both documenting culture here, but also importing and exporting culture. So we may have Yoko Ono, but Yoko Ono is exactly is presented at the exact same level as an artist that nobody's necessarily heard of. So it's a level playing field within the magazine. Everybody's treated with the same level of respect. It's all artists.
Are you able to pay anybody?
Not very much and not very often. Yeah. Well, I mean, this gets to the issue of the design firm, which is what has sustained Plazm magazine, which is that's the magazine has never made any money, and it may never make money, but we're lucky if it breaks even, and the commercial design work that we do is what subsidizes it, really.
How do you? I mean, I'm sorry to dominate the conversation.
Jeez, yeah.
Well, like we were talking about the other night, you had mentioned like there is no Plazm without Nike, and when it comes to your politics and your want to be able to produce this and you want to be able to be a politically engaged designer, but then you have a company that like Nike where you can find fault in. How do you reconcile those differences?
Yeah, it's a complex.
You want to be able to do this good thing, right, but then you have to deal with this thing that you could equate as very bad. Yeah,
it's a very. I mean, this is exactly the heart of everything that I personally struggle with in doing this ongoing project. But. There's a questionnaire that was sitting out in the front here, and I think this is something that Milton Glaser had presented. I saw him present in 2002 at an AIGA conference, and I think it's a great, it's a great list of questions in terms of what you'd be willing to do. I don't know if I have it here. What you'd be willing to do, for money or as a designer, and it starts with things like, would you design a package to look bigger on the shelf, and goes down this slippery slope to, would you design an ad for a product whose frequent use could result in the user's death, and so in between those 2 points, there's a myriad of choices in each case. So Nike is a complex one. I mean, almost anybody that's worked in the commercial design world in Portland probably has had exposure to working or an opportunity to work for Nike at some point in time. I mean, there's big fish here in this city. So, also,
I'll just add too, this is just for myself, but in my mind, all money is dirty, and it's one could just as, someone could be publishing Plazm who also is running a winery, it's and the money that comes from, the money that people are buying their wine with, ultimately comes from somewhere. So it's to make too much of, to me, making too much of a kind of connection between the, work, it's largely Josh, I think, and his sort of passion and effort that makes it happen, and he could just as easily be I don't know, selling
insurance,
a cobbler or something,
Yeah. Well, it definitely, but it is. It's true. Money's got to come from somewhere, because the magazine doesn't sustain itself. I mean, we tried to make the magazine sustain itself, and it just.
But at the same time, you can't equate all money as dirty money equally. You have to say that there is cleaner money and dirtier money.
Sure. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Well, it's relative.
Krups was going in
if you think you can isolate your clean money, I would love to get some of that money.
Hand it over.
Is that Annette?
Lay some of that money on
Noelle.
Oh, she's good.
Oh, thanks. It doesn't seem like you all are terribly concerned about the magazine making money, or you do more than one issue a year. It seems like you're an incredible filter. You're looked upon as a filter, and you talk about the responsibility of art, commenting on life in the current day and how that affects, social aspects and political aspects. And you have this opportunity in that responsibility of being the filter and looked on as that, as almost like a call to action in small ways, not big, beating over the head with the bat kind of ways, but say that I am some kid
from the Midwest, as once upon a time I was, and I read this magazine and I'm inspired, but I live in bumblefuck Indiana. There's not a whole lot that I feel I can do. But if I look towards, you've got a back section in every single issue, even if I have to wait a year to find it, as to things that if I was enlightened by one article, here are things that I could go do and find. So then you're also connecting artists with artists, or aspiring artists with artists that don't live in Portland, Oregon. And it seems like, obviously, from the people that have talked here, that's who you're affecting. And that gives you a much greater cause than worrying about whether your money is clean or dirty, but the end result would be much greater.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I end up feeling like the art world or the literary world is generally more like a gift economy than like an actual economy, and it happens in a kind of, Plazm could never make money because there just aren't that many people that are interested in this stuff. It's like a fragile bunch. This is, the fact we can assemble this many people in a room is incredible, it's like there's just not that many people that are interested, and it's like, but I don't think that makes it bad or unimportant. Like, to me, that makes it even more important, and it's like, someone, yeah.
Doesn't that speak to the fact that there are all these people who may have small businesses or may be starting similar enterprises that could advertise in Plazm? And maybe, like Noelle said, maybe there's a kid in Iowa who would love to get, every month get an issue of Plazm where he could be inspired or she could be inspired. And if you did start maybe, opening, maybe money doesn't have to be dirty. Maybe there are enough people like us who are interested in good things and advertising interesting things that,
Sure.
I say the more the better.
I'm all for it, yeah.
Keep it coming.
Yeah. I think we'd all, I'd love to just be doing that magazine.
Once a year, that's so sad. Once a year.
There's a website, and the website may be getting more stuff on it soon. So that is one way of sidestepping. Those of you who have worked on magazines and small periodicals, it's insane. And the money of it is absolutely crazy. The fact that you're felling trees to make a book. We use recycled paper, yes. It's the economy of it is really maddening. And so mostly what you see is people adjusting their editorial content, all of their content, in order to get those elusive ad dollars, in order to make it possible to be a monthly that comes out every month and inspires somebody and pays its own bills. And you get so much tripe as a result. I'm a freelance writer. I write a bunch of that shit myself to get by. But I know what markets I'm writing for, what those editors expect, and despite how not everybody, but a lot of journalists like to think that there's some purity left in journalism, every one of those entities is trying to survive in a very competitive media landscape. I want to say that for myself, I came into this situation, I mostly work as a freelancer doing this and that. I moved to New York, and I couldn't just skate by anymore. It's like, you have to go sell your soul right now or borrow your rent money again from your roommate. So I got a corporate job, did that for a while. It was interesting. And I was really happy to walk away from that and come home, live in Portland. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to work for any of those assholes anymore because I don't approve of what they do in the world. I'm not going to work for Sting again. I'm not going to work for Compact Computer and Nickelodeon. Bite me. And my mind has been changed. And a lot of that, and I write about that in the chat book that we have. I'm going to ask you to read from that in a second, okay? Okay. But a lot of it is from watching this guy, who I watch rather closely because in addition to working on the magazine together, we're also engaged. We kind of know each other. And I would characterize what I saw Josh doing as sort of a Robin Hood mentality. So as Sam mentioned, the dirty money, Josh was going for that dirty money. He was grabbing it, and he was making something good with it. I maintained my little trip for quite some time of like, I'm only going to work for, small businesses and nonprofits that I approve of what they're doing. And the tough part for me there is that everybody gets their money from somewhere. And I'm not saying that anybody else should feel this way, but I just personally started feeling like that I was kind of being a shallow hypocrite by just taking it kind of to this top layer. I moved to Portland. You get offered Nike work here all the time. And I'd be like, no, I'm virtuous. I won't work for Nike. And whoever offered me the work, I would explain to them why I wouldn't do any Nike work, because I'm so cool and the labor practices and this and that. And to Nike's credit, they have actually done some pretty incredible stuff within their industry on that regard. But I don't know. I just eventually started going, well, the people I do get money from that I consider to be, pure and indie and okay enough, where are they getting their money from? And if you start funneling it down, if you're participating in this system at all, if you're paying money to be here tonight and eat good, organically raised food, somewhere you got that money. Where did that money come from? Who are the people who support the cool nonprofit or the educational organization that you will work for? And I think that for me, it's been a really tough personal thing to go through. Morally, sort of in my gut, I'm like, fuck all of them. I want nothing to do with this. But realistically, if you want to live in this world and you want to be part of this larger community, it is wrapped up in the marketplace. It is wrapped up in how we get our food and how we pay our rent, the fact that we have to pay rent. And I just pretty recently came to a similar conclusion that, well, all that money's kind of dirty. Where can we do the least damage but then do the best work with that money once we actually get it?
Well, I want to add to that too, because I feel like as a designer, as a person that's been trained in methods of mass communication, that this is something where you have the opportunity, if you're a designer, to strategically work with all these different clients. And I think that's a whole other level to it, where a designer has a role and a responsibility when interacting with those companies to, if something to, at the very least, specifying recycled paper, but much greater than that, you have the opportunity to have conversations about the decisions that these companies make. So I think there's another level to that, and it's not that they're just paying for some surface thing, but there's more to it than that.
I think, has the reverse ever happened in the sense where you guys have been selective of firms because of perceived agendas on their part? Have you ever been actually rejected by a private client because of your values or how they...
Yeah, that's happened within the magazine with advertisers, for sure. I mean, there was an instance where a paper sponsor got involved, and we were doing this project. It's called Mine, M-I-N-E, with a T-M after it, and it was about ownership in the digital age. And they didn't end up. We printed all this stuff, and they ended up just throwing it in the recycling bin. They paid thousands and thousands of dollars to throw all this stuff away because they didn't like what it said in the end. But it's still in the magazine. So, it was that was a weird project in that case, because there were also, then we came into a situation where some of the designers that were involved, once the paper company became involved, they couldn't be involved because they worked for other paper companies. So there were a number of issues like that, but yeah, it's come up.
Greg?
Sure.
Well, I just want to say, because there's been so much conversation about how clean and dirty we are living in a capitalist society, and Tiffany asked about where we got the money tonight. Much like the Nazis who said they thought the death camps were holiday camps, for those people, we found our money under a cabbage patch in the garden, and we have no idea where it came from. But we just, I'm kidding. I have an advertising agency. That's why I have the whore button on.
Yeah. Well, now if it was in any way obtuse, now I take it everyone knows why we gave this evening the affectionate title, "The Wife, the Mistress, and the Prostitute," just to sort of draw out this conflicting and also fertile, cross-pollinating network of associations and influences that we are all a part of.
Right, and I think it's like we have two sides to our personalities, right? We have a dark side and a light side. Art is the light side, and the rest of it's commerce. You know? They love you.
Can one live without the other? I mean, can Plazm exist without this larger sort of culture of consumption that Plazm's in some way critiquing?
Well, we're part of it. I don't know if we critique aspects of it, but I don't have any, we sell the magazine. We're part of it. We live in a capitalist society. We live in a consumer culture. We're one voice within it.
Right, but insofar as you're political, there's some concept of changing something. So what is it that you're interested in seeing changing?
Well, more just society would be a good start, something that doesn't exploit people, that doesn't bomb other countries, it doesn't, there are a million things to change. Ecological awareness, we don't live in a sustainable way. You could have a whole list of things that would be great to change, but I think the back room changes things too, just sitting here having a conversation, and I think that's what our magazine attempts to do in a public way, just a different format. We put it out there in the world.
Anne?
I remember being at Woodstock this year, and Diana Abijamra was saying to an audience that art is patron. It does. Somebody has to pay for it. So really, there's the option of the public magazine or the Academy. I think they both have their compromises. I think when you have the Academy sponsoring artists, that things can become quite institutionalized. And when you have magazines sponsoring artists, I think it's much more accessible, generally speaking, and much more attentive to audience, but also more susceptible to commercialism. So it's kind of your point in my opinion.
Early on, we thought about writing grants and being we are actually the very first entity was a nonprofit. We tried to, but it seemed like so much work. You could spend all this time writing these grants,
or you could write,
or you could pitch, somebody to buy an ad, and that's the direction we went. It's funded by advertising. So.
Can I say something? Tiffany said something about being an early internet adopter. If the internet has taught us anything at all, and even this dude wrote that book, The Long Tail, it's that if you want to do something badly enough, there are enough people around to pay you to do that, right, or to support you doing that. And that's really true. We have a friend, John Jost, who is the most independent filmmaker in America. John makes $10,000 a year. The Coen brothers are Louis B. Mayer compared to this guy, So it's what you guys are doing. Of course there's going to be an audience for it. Your challenge is to get the magazine out there.
Yeah. Look at Fred and Tootie, they did it all themselves.
Right.
$10,000 or $20,000 a year, tour the world, and
John Jost is awesome.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
John Calvelli, you had your hand up.
I had my hand up, but I was still kind of trying to figure out the question.
It'll come back around.
Well, I guess it was like the notion of the Nazis that was brought up, and thinking about sort of a conversation about good money and bad money, and no one's ever hired me to work for Nike, unfortunately. No, fortunately, actually, sorry, that was a slip of the tongue there. I wonder about the frog in the tub of water. And I've always sort of thought about, well, when does it get really bad? We don't know it. And I often think that we're in that situation increasingly now.
Are you talking about the frog where the water's getting hotter?
Yeah.
It doesn't know it's boiling.
Imperceptibly.
Right.
Yes. And we can have great things like Plazm, like Germany had its Wagner, and put in that or whatever. But sometimes the situation here seems incredibly scary, not only in Iraq but with climate change, I don't know. I get uncomfortable with sort of. It's nice to have pleasant discussions over dinner. So, but at the same time, I'm kind of increasingly concerned about how serious the situation is of the United States and the world. And Plazm does its job, what it tries to do, but then, I don't know, if we all, as designers, there's a question on the questionnaire. I told you I didn't formulate my question. About whether or not you should be registered as a designer.
Right.
Let's say all designers had to take a Hippocratic oath. I will do no harm. How many of us would work for Nike? You probably get a lot of applications for Plazm maybe, but how many people would work for Nike, and under what conditions? How many people would work for all, so much of what the design industry is about? That takes the trees, that takes the money, that creates the images of unsustainability.
I think this is a huge area of this should be a huge area of discussion within design in institutions and education. It should be this should be the thing that designers are talking about. And like when the First Things First manifesto was put out, there was a big flap about that, which was an advocacy of only working for corporations or entities that that do good in the world, or that take a responsibility. I think design is a responsibility, and I think it's there's so many years graphic design as a profession was to serve industry, right? It's a tool of industry. We communicate ideas. We take brand values and put them into this simple signifier which is instantly recognizable. I was just reading this article recently about the American Heart Association logo. So when you go into a supermarket and you buy a product and it has the American Heart Association logo on it, you think, well, maybe it's been endorsed by this organization. But in fact, to get the American Heart Association logo on your product, you only have to spend $2,500 in a one-time donation and then a monthly fee, right? So you're supporting. And the American Heart Association also offers product exclusivity. So if one product, pays enough, then their competitor can't get the logo. So, but that little signifier was made by a designer, right? And it was made to communicate a certain thing. And so, I'm just putting that out there rhetorically. This is an issue that designers need to be discussing. What our role is and what our role can be.
How do we? As part of that discussion, how do we form the way to judge what is the good and what is the bad to work for? There is the flip side in the recent history of benevolent acts gone wrong too. Thinking of DDT, for example. And the irony of the anniversary of Silent Spring and the recent rise in malaria cases in the third world because of the decision to go across the board banning of DDT without filling in the gap of white hat in the first place. And so my point is, to those who want to walk that path, who makes the decision? Who forms that board? How do we know?
Yeah,
I think we each form our own board, and that's part of how we individuate ourselves and our ethical choices. But the hard part is that if you don't have a format where you can actually talk about it with other people, right. I think it's very easy to get caught. Whatever little position you take, if you take some kind of unchangeable, inflexible position, which as I was explaining before, that's kind of where I was. Like, well, here's the big corporation. I won't work for them. That, I think, has as much danger in its own sort of intractability as saying that you'll open your arms and take on, any client, Hitler, whoever walks down the line. I think every person, whether you're a designer... What?
Why, Tiffany? I don't understand. It's like, if you have an ethical intolerance for a type of client, if you believe that client is creating problems in the world, and why not be intolerant to that and be,
I think there's
working in some other field. I mean,
I think there's an issue of balance to deal with. And I'm not saying that, I don't think that any of us in this room can claim that we are right and that any of the other ones are wrong. And that's just kind of how I believe that stuff works. I think that we're all responsible for bothering to sit down and think about it and sort out where we are in our personal lives and in our personal arc of ethical responsibility, which I think changes with time. Mostly you talk to somebody in their mid-40s who has kids that they're trying to raise, they're going to give you a very, very different answer about who to work for than your average 23-year-old who's been living off their parents going to college for the last 4 years. And I admire that idealism. I just wonder about creating a situation where there is balance. And something that I experienced was I was working with a nonprofit in Africa with a woman who is now actually combating malaria there, so that sort of got my attention. And our project, we were working with Youssou N'Dour, this musician in West Africa, and it was all very noble and great. And then once we did finally get the very serious amounts of funding that we needed to do this project, it came from Hewlett-Packard, who, for a giant corporation, they actually do a lot of pretty admirable charity work. Then they decided that they would take our little nonprofit $6 million thing we were doing, and they would fold it in and make it the flagship of an $8 billion effort to totally move in on the entire continent of Africa. And so I was going to go from getting a tiny little honorarium and getting to go to Africa a couple times to making serious money as the creative director of this project. Only it was going to be for-profit on a sort of colonial-sounding Hewlett-Packard taking over Africa thing. I quit. I resigned. But I think that now, at the point where I am in my life, I might stay on. I might think about it. I might think about how much good we could do as a project. All the good goals that we had were not going to be changed by the fact that Hewlett-Packard thought that they might get something out of it, too. And to me, that's the issue of finding the balance. And I think at different points in our lives, we might have different answers to that. And sometimes the compromises that you have to make may come out to be worth it.
Isn't that the balance, though, where as an individual producer within that corporation, if you can kind of create that balance where the idea of doing something good within a corporation, where they can give that much money, actually might do something good?
One should hope. My main problem actually with rejecting everyone out of hand and saying, well, I'm really cool and pure and I'm going to sit over here in the corner and not talk to any of the bad guys, is that you get so isolated in a culture in which communication and media and money are all part of the mix that I think that sometimes some of the more passionate activists actually cut themselves off from making a bigger difference in the world because they're so pure, they're not talking to anybody but each other.
What I find really confusing is the idea that the money is the bad object, not the people using it makes the money bad. And so I think that it would be good, and it's what you're talking about, Tiffany, is that if we look upon our own selves as our own little mafia of good doers, and we launder our own money, all that money that does who knows and who wants to know what, and we take it and we launder it into good acts. And that's what you're talking about. It's what the magazine tries to do. And I think that rather than nitpicking as to where the source of the money is only good or bad given on what you spend it on. And I think that we just need to change our attitudes, how we look at money, and that it's this evil thing to acquire and this evil thing to spend. It's what we do with it that makes it.
I think arguably, wealth is created by surplus value, which is a function of exploitation of labor. So, there is an element in which money is inherently evil.
I'm talking about you yourself, what you're doing with that magazine, because you touch money that inherently you're bad. You're not talking about surplus. You're taking a small amount of money, which is...
Well, no, we're not really creating wealth here. No, but I mean, in order to pay the publisher, like, somewhere the wealth had to be created, I mean, I'm not arguing. I mean, I'm into money laundering, too.
Well, no, I just don't quite, understand how that's a bad thing. Somebody else that chose to make their money on the backs of others and they want to have, tons of money, that was their choice. They made their money bad. But I'm not going to make my money bad. When I shop, when I buy, when I spend.
The thing is, when you do buy a product in the store, a new product, the profit that is being generated by that is a differential between what was paid to the labor to make it and what they can sell the consumer. So it's like it is inherently, to live in a capitalist society, money is inherently a function of this kind of exploitation.
You buy, do you not?
Well, no, but if you buy something, I don't see how one can. I mean, whatever. I really don't want to be in a position of defending acquiescence to capitalism in any way. I just want to be like.
I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is just. I mean, I'm just talking about basic sort of Marxist sort of theory here. It's like that. Say you've got a shoe. You've got a new shoe in the store. And part of the sort of aura of newness around it, because it's all just stuff that was kind of imported and put together by people, part of the kind of aura of it comes from the fact that there is the cost that it took to make it is actually that more is being charged than the cost it made to make it. That's kind of where the whole sense of its newness kind of comes from. That there is some sort of gulf between the just brute labor, the use value, and the sort of market value. So that's just kind of how money. I mean, that's one theory of how money is, or of how capitalism functions. Maybe that's not true. I don't know.
Well, but it also segues quite.
I mean, whatever. I'm not like a
effortlessly.
I don't want to sound like a Marxist exactly.
Well, I think that's good. But
we practice
Noelle, I appreciate what you're saying.
socialist
I think
capitalism.
that one of the really frustrating things is that even after you make this really concerted and thoughtful choice as to on what and where and how to spend your money, then when you relinquish that money, you no longer have any control over where it's going as well. Like, it enters a whole nother kind of system.
Well, and even if you're making your own soy candles or whatever, like, you're the one you're charging people a little bit more for it so that you can, then the actual time and effort that you put into it in order to get your little bit of profit in order to participate in the economy. And it's like, that's, it doesn't matter whether it's Nike shoes or Tom's of Maine, whatever. It's like, no, I mean, I'm not saying there's no degrees of difference between slave labor and
He's
labor
saying the
that is
mechanism is the same.
and that
The mechanism is.
I mean, it's like there's one,
There is a degree by somebody getting $1 less, and then.
I don't think anyone here. I doubt that anyone in this room would say that all workers shouldn't have health care and should, not be able to pay their, basic sort of way. I mean, it's like. I mean, there's a level in which I don't really understand if there's really an argument in this room whatsoever. I mean, it's like.
But I think
somebody's got.
Okay, I just want to say that, as usual at the Backroom, we could talk all night. Some of us tend to stay very late, but there are others who have reasons to leave, and we've been talking for an hour and a half. So let's have a couple more questions, and then let's all stay, if we can, because Tara's going to play again, and we don't want to miss that.
Yay.
So.
This is more just a comment or a contribution. The publication was initiated to support and highlight and basically provide a venue for artists to represent themselves. Art is inherently a luxury good, and the the market value of art is purely nebulous in terms of how it is determined. It's also, very precious. It tends to be something that those of privilege who have expendable income can afford. There's no question that we need art in our lives. I can probably make a safe bet that the paintings of Lascaux were not commissioned, but just about everything else has probably been, some exchange of goods, whether it's the black figure paintings of Hellenistic, or Storm Tharp's paintings, for example.
Storm, you capitalist running dog.
The point is, it's an exchange of goods, and being an art dealer, the way that I deal with it is one, I don't consider myself a dealer in the sense of being a pimp, but I do consider myself a bit of a cupid in terms of matching people and their affinities and their visceral reactions and love for a visual object, but it is an exchange of one treasure for another. And in that way, money should not be considered unctuous, but it should allow us to acquire the things that improve and enhance our lives.
Well, I don't know if I completely agree that art is a luxury good, but I think art is I think art is a catalyst for social change. Art is. I mean, I don't see that. Yeah, art can't be worthless and a luxury good at the same time. I feel like, but it's like, but I totally am with you in the basic idea that it's like it is worthless and utterly precious at the same time, and that it's like there's not a contradiction in that way to me, and it defies ultimately the money logic. I mean, it's like there's not. I mean, I just feel like marrying the questions of art and commerce too tightly, it just becomes like you're just chasing the same question over and over again, and it's like what turns us on about, what turns me on, just to use Storm as an example, about Storm's art has nothing to do with like his the market value. I mean, it has to do with the color and the form and the like actual artistic traditions that it's participating in, which are, bounded in some ways by money, but are like so much beyond that. And it's like, and I just, to me, I just start to be like, okay, everyone's, making money and money is bad and everything, but it's like, it never exactly gets to what turns me on about art, It's like it just is a separate thing.
That's right, but the dollars go to help pay Storm's rent.
No, I mean, no one's arguing about that, and it's great that Storm is alive, but it's like,
Yes. Money is the only working artist in the room.
Yes, Mike.
Oh.
Money is stored energy and time. Like, that's what money is. It's like, I spend my time and energy at work during my day job in order to create a surplus of this thing that is money that I can then expend on other things.
Right. But some people's time turns out to be a lot more precious than others, and they get a lot more money for their time, which is unfair,
Well, others would argue, but
okay.
but unfortunately, I'm on the bottom end of that argument.
Right.
But I happen to own a piece of Mike. I own, I think, at least 2 shares of you, correct? And I'm not joking. Mike, would you, I think, as we segue out of this conversation, I think your exercise in artistic capital, I'd really love for you to tell everybody a little bit about.
The idea is that you're invested in the future of your friends. Like you would say, I hope that my friends do well, and I hope that my family does well. And so what I've done is created a system where people can invest in my future explicitly by offering shares of myself, so that you buy shares, and if I do well, those shares will pay off for you, and you can actually sell out at a certain point. And so I bought in at $1 per share, but now it's worth $5 per share, and I can say, oh, that's enough.
Have you been?
I mean, David Bowie did the same thing like 10 years ago.
Have you been affected by the subprime mortgage process?
Not yet.
Is there something I need to know?
Not yet.
Well, let me not conclude, because this is a conversation that I don't think is going to have a conclusion for a very, very long time, and probably not in our lifetimes. But the reason why I'm so glad that you are all here, and I am so grateful to the three of you for being here, is that Matthew and Michael and I are firm believers that we begin change through conversation, and that we are living in a time when we don't spend enough time having conversations together and talking to one another, and that conversations are things that need to be multiplied, and that evenings like this are hopefully beginnings for that multiplication, so that this conversation, whether it is difficult or pleasant at various moments, is something that's taken outside of this room and shared. So I'm really grateful to all of you for being here and participating in that. And, we express ourselves differently verbally than we do in writing sometimes. And the beautiful, exquisite essays that the three of these fine individuals have written in this essay talk about these things from in some ways a much more intimate perspective, and in sometimes a very brutal perspective. If we had more time, I'd have Tiffany in particular read from her essay. But please read them and enjoy them, and take this object that was created with a lot of love aesthetically and given to you as a gift into your lives, and pass it around, and know that there are some more that can be had if you'd like to contact us with the Backroom. So I would like to thank our guests very, very much.